Now, my colleagues here, we have a bunch of what we call global college student ambassadors, which our Korea Forum for Progress has been carrying on, since its inception. Those ambassadors, basically college students, and selected on a very competitive basis, okay, in terms of their, the skills and their mental orientation, and also understanding a global business culture, international relations, so forth. So I think we should provide the opportunity for them to ask you specific and some penetrating questions, okay? So let me turn around. I would like to invite the global ambassadors to raise some questions. Please point out specifically, which panelist, you would like to hear the answer. Okay? Please go ahead. Anybody? Identify your name and your school.
Hi, I am Kwak Pura, and I study in Dongguk University. At first, I really enjoy the speech, and let me ask you some questions, Mr. Andre. South Korea is moving toward becoming an innovative society with an emphasis on creative economy. Are there lessons that we can learn from the other country? Could you explain more specific?
Okay, you scare me because you make me a specialist of the countries. Okay, I can say what I've seen. I've worked in Singapore for quite a few years, and some of us have referred to Singapore as, and I think Korea used Singapore many times as a benchmark. I believe this is a good source of inspiration because it has some comparability with Korea. It started from nowhere with only their own team spirit and their own educated people. But they had some advantages that that Korea doesn't have, and we have to do without. But overall, I think what is the strength of Singapore is that with the kind of government they have, they are still able to recognize that they got it wrong and that they had to do differently. I mean, for a while, Singapore was very, straight jacket. The tourists going to Singapore who had long hair had to cut the hair at the border. There was no nightclub. They were pretending to have fun, but they were actually having zero fun. And in the last 15 years, that country has tremendously changed, and I think even its reputation overseas changed radically, that it's a fun place to go. And this is not by having decided to become like Patpong in Thailand. It still has a good reputation, I'd say, but they have certainly absorbed part of the standards that internationally are recognized for becoming cool and relaxed. And I think that's inspiration for Korea, is when the Korean society wants to change towards the something new and that's successful elsewhere, we try to measure it against the international standards. That's always the best way, and not try to do something that we in Korea do best, because it works only in Korea. And Amy, you spoke about the standards in Korea. In the early days, the Korean cell phone is fantastic in Korea, but you go overseas, it's just a piece of plastic. And today, that has changed, and that became a world beater. And so, for the innovative spirit of Korea, I think what is being done today, like promoting K-pop and all this, I think at least it works. I'm not an expert, but it looks like it made Korea much more cool overseas. And it made a feeling that Korean products are cool, which in the beginning it was not true at all. Korean products had a reputation to be cheap, but not very good. And I think now, if Korea wants to emulate like Singapore, they should go for this kind of international standards of, being fun and cool and relaxed. And I think Seoul has managed this already. And Busan, I would say Busan has been a town which in the beginning was, in my memory, a nice environment because it's the seaside, but it was permanent traffic jam and very ugly buildings, and it was a spoiled environment. But today it became a fantastic city. It's just a bit unknown overseas.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I speak too much.
Thank you. Andrea, my colleague, Dr. Kim Yun-hyung, who is in charge of the running, the Academy for our global ambassadors. Dr. Kim, after hearing the Andrea's recommendation, our global ambassadors should be able to make a trip to Singapore to learn, what's going on there. Okay. So why don't you suggest to the board chair, Dr. Lee Seung-yun and Dr. Son Byung-do. Okay, let me invite the next one. Make it short and yeah.
안녕하십니까. 저는 공주교육대학교에 재학 중인 김한준 학생이라고 합니다.
Okay, please, slow it down so that they can. Yeah.
저는 루카부대 상공회의소 사무총장님께 질문을 드리고자 합니다.
Mr. Bude. Yeah.
사무총장님께서 창조경제혁신센터와 기술은행의 설립을 언급하시면서 대한민국의 창조경제 계획이 긍정적인 방향으로 가고 있다고 말씀하신 데 크게 공감합니다. 하지만 한국의 스타트업 기업들은 기업가 정신이나 경영 능력을 육성해줄 액셀러레이터스가 부족합니다. 프랑스의 경우 누마라는 대규모 스타트업 기업 홍보 행사를 하거나 이동통신사인 프리의 주도로 파리 제13구에 1000개의 벤처기업을 육성하고 있다고 들었습니다. 이러한 프랑스의 사례들을 통해 우리 대한민국의 스타트업 기업들이 성장할 수 있도록 액셀러레이터스를 많이 만들어내고 활용하려면 어떻게 해야 되는지 알고 싶습니다.
So, Mr. Bude, did you get the questions? Okay. Go ahead.
So I believe the number of accelerators is actually increasing in Korea. So I think it's just a matter of time that today much money is invested. So I'm pretty much optimistic. So I think it's, let's wait and see. I think the frame of mind will be changing. There's investment there. All of the fundamentals are there. So, it's just a matter of catching up in that way. So, I believe more and more accelerators will actually be created. There are more, not every day, but it's just a trend, so it will be going on. We just need to wait a little bit more time for the policies to be implemented and to be efficient. But I'm pretty much optimistic about that.
Okay, thank you. And, now let me also invite the third one.
안녕하세요. 한국외국어대학교 경영학전공 도준석입니다. 저는 안충영 동방성장위원회 위원장님께 질문을 드리고자 합니다. 우선 안 위원장님께서 말씀하셨던 창조경제를 실현하기 위해서는 정규직과 비정규직의 이중구조가 제기하는 문제점을 해결해야 함을 찬성합니다. 제가 아는 바로는 비정규직에서 정규직으로 전환되는 비율이 OECD 회원국 평균인 53.8%의 절반에 못 미칠 만큼 낮은 수치인 걸로 알고 있습니다. 이는 인건비와 같은 현실적 비용의 문제라는 의견도 존재하는데요. 이 말고도 여러 문제점이 있을 텐데 안 위원장님께서 생각하시는 이중구조의 각종 문제점 중 가장 핵심적인 문제는 무엇이고 그에 대한 해결책은 어떤 것이 있을지 그것이 질문입니다.
Well, that is tough one. Actually, it's constitute the core part of Korea labor sector reform. And I indicated that Korea really, suffer from dichotomy of the labor market existing between regular workers and the irregular workers. We also observe tremendous wage differential between two sectors. And the productivity of the irregular workers, very low because of this differentiated wage and also, differentiate fringe benefits, so on and so on. So I think the crucial issue Korea must resolve to attract foreign direct investment as well as to increase, labor productivity, as the Ueno-san mentioned. I think that we should, transfer irregular workers to regular while ensuring the labor market, flexibility. Indeed, it is very, very challenging issue, and my commission is not directly involved on this issue, but we'll bear that in mind when we deal with, designation of SME proper industries, so on and so on. Okay, thank you very much for your question. Okay, let me invite the fourth one.
네, 안녕하세요. 현재 연세대학교에서 정치외교학을 전공 중인 윤수정이라고 합니다. 저는 특별히 우에노 야스아키 후지제록스 사장님께 질문을 드리고 싶은데요. 특별히 토론에서 직접 언급이 되지 않아서 좀 아쉬웠지만 창조경제실현을 위한 기타 제안으로서 경제자유구역을 서울까지 확대하는 것을 제안을 해주신 걸로 알고 있습니다. 그 부분에 깊이 공감을 했기에 그와 관련된 질문을 드리고자 하는데요. 최근에 한국경제연구원에서 2004년에서 2012년 기간에 경제자유구역 외국인 투자 유치액이 총 30억 5천만 달러로 전체 외국인 직접 투자 유치 누계액의 4.1%에 불과하다라고 밝힌 바가 있습니다. 제가 생각하기에는 이게 개발 초기임을 감안을 하더라도 상당히 낮은 성과라고 생각을 하는데요. 그래서 제안해 주신 것처럼 서울까지 경제자유구역을 확대하는 것도 좋지만 기존에 이미 설치된 경제자유구역들이 보다 적극적이고 실효적인 성과를 거둘 수 있는 방법을 모색하는 것도 중요하다고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 이렇게 실제 기존에 설치가 됐던 경제자유구역들이 성과를 내지 못하는 이유가 무엇이라고 생각하시는지, 그리고 그것을 좀 더 활성화시키기 위한 방안으로 어떤 것들을 제안을 할 수 있는지 사장님의 의견을 좀 듣고 싶습니다.
Thank you for the question. It's a really tough question, I guess. But it's one of our free economic zone I mentioned, as also part of 17 creative innovation centers locally now establishing. So I believe, FDI view, it's not only for like a manufacturing sector, but also like IT, some other service business as well, to create some more employment, is also required, condition. That's why, it's my personal opinion to make a balance, support structure for foreign investor, to easy to enter the market. So, I believe, it's still metropolitan area, has a ton of opportunity, to increase, FDI as well. So that's one of my view, to, make this comment. But it's not so fundamental resolution as your view, of part of, investment and also how to utilize in current existing way. But, so that's, probably, it's next challenge maybe, but, so I think, it's a balance, regional investment location is also required to be considered. Yeah. Any other? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And let me see. Any other question? I collected, several questions. And unless you have any other, questions from our global investors, let me just go ahead with the questions collected from the floor.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 서강대학교에 재학 중이고요. 지금 전국연합 시장경제학술 동아리 YSC의 부회장인 이효린이라고 합니다. 네, 저는 우에노 야스아키 사장님께 질문 드리고 싶은데요. 먼저 저도 한국의 노동 생산성이 굉장히 저하되어 있다는 것에 동의하는 바이고요. 이에 따라서 노동 생산성 증대 방안에 대해서 말씀해 주셨는데, 급여 체제를 시간에 대한 보상 차원에서 이제 성과에 따른 보상으로 이제 전환을 하셔야 된다고 말씀하셨습니다. 저 또한 이러한 방식에 대해서 이제 깊이 공감을 하고 있습니다. 하지만 우리나라의 경우 이미 많은 기업들에서 사내 경쟁이 과열되어 있고요. 이에 따라 네, 사내 경쟁이 굉장히 과열화되어 있고 이에 따라 사내 분위기상 반강제적으로 휴가를 반납하거나 야근에 시달리는 그런 많은 사원들이 있습니다. 따라서 저는 이러한 노동 개혁이 좀 부작용이 있지 않을까 염려되는 부분이 없지 않아 있는데요. 사장님께서는 우리나라의 이러한 노동법 개혁의 부작용이 어떻게 발생할 것인지 어떻게 생각하고 계신지 한번 여쭙고 싶고요. 그에 따라 일본을 비롯한 다른 나라의 사례들은 어떤 것들이 있는지 한번 듣고 싶습니다.
So, Ueno-san?
Yeah, it's a big challenge, question, but, although, in my company, as a group-wise, Xerox Group, also I establish, evaluate each company's, country's productivity, labor productivity. Although, by country, so there are, labor law or regulation is different, so it's just not so easy to, compare as apple to apple. But clearly, as one mentioned, to drive further productivity, because of current, labor like a salary condition, it's not so attractive, and also lots of kind of boundary between high side and low side. So I think it's very it's good time to look at how to improve the productivity for low side as average also. Then so that's why one of our resolution is government need to reconsider the current labor law and system to support them. So side effect, of course, lots of complaint because some people fear I'm gonna lose some salary or versus performance. So, but I think this is kind of a not easy way to, but company also try to evaluate people fairly and give more fair compensation who really deliver the result or who contributed. That kind of system we need to establish fundamentally. Yeah.
All right. Well, one more? Okay. Yeah. Please be short.
I also prepared question in Korean. 안녕하세요. 저는 지암선진화 아카데미 14기이자 고려대학교 경제학과에 재학 중인 정복윤입니다. 저는 에이미 잭슨 토론자분께 질문 드리도록 하겠습니다. 예측 가능한 기업 환경을 위해 한국의 경직된 노동시장을 유연화해야 한다고 토론문에 제시되어 있던데요. 여기에 대해서 질문 드리고 싶습니다. 정부의 4대 개혁에도 포함되어 있는 노동시장 개혁에 대해 임금피크제, 성과제 등을 도입하자는 의견이 있으나 저는 가장 먼저 노사가 서로 한 발짝 뒤로 물러서 합의점을 이끌어내는 것이 선행되어야 한다고 봅니다. 특히 이런 점에서 노조는 기업의 사정을 존중하고 기업은 노동자들의 손실을 일부 보전해주는 시기 상호협력 및 소통이 필요하다고 생각합니다. 여기에 대해서 어떻게 생각하시는지, 그리고 특히 노조를 포용하기 위한 소통의 길로 이끌기 위해서 구체적으로 어떤 방법이 제시되어야 할지 미국 노동시장의 사례를 바탕으로 의견을 듣고 싶습니다. 감사합니다.
Labor unions in the United States continue to be an important part of our business environment, but the trends in the United States for labor unions is the number of participants in labor unions and labor union activities has gone down quite a bit in the United States. So there may be some lessons to be learned for Korea in the U.S. Experience, but it's not exactly comparable at this point in time, I think. Many of my companies, many U.S. companies here, employ many tens of thousands of Koreans, so labor issues are certainly of primary importance to many investors here, many U.S. investors here. And I think I totally agree with you that a constructive, realistic dialogue on both sides is very important because, companies need to be able to deal with upturns and downturns in the economy. And ultimately, they need to be able to ensure that they maintain profitability so that they continue to be strong employers in any marketplace. So we would agree that a good dialogue going forward is really important in that area.
Okay, well, any more from designated the global investors? Well, no more than I collected several questions, written format, and these questions addressed both to me and Amy. Okay. Now, first question. Well, we need a foreign direct investment, okay? But some Koreans, and in fact, many Koreans, foreign investors are here to reap a short-term profit rather than long-term commitment. Once we experienced, right after Asian financial crisis, some international hedge funds arrived in Korea to gain a fire sales, a real estate property, and then enjoying huge profit, then get out of the country. So in this regard, how we can distinguish between good foreign investors and short-term profit maximizers, like the hedge funds, something like that. That's the question.
Okay, that's a difficult question. I think there are many things that come to mind to answer that question. First of all, the vast, vast, vast majority of all our companies represented here are long-term, long-term investors and have been in the Korean market for decades, but also give back to Korean society quite a bit. And I can say from the American perspective, U.S. companies have embraced giving back to local communities in a very major way, not replicated yet in big Korean companies. And one of my disappointments in my job here is I do not feel I'm doing a good enough job of conveying to the Korean public and Korean policymakers how much American companies actually do to give back to Korean society. Just for example, after the economic downturn in the late 1990s, the American Chamber of Commerce itself formed a new charitable arm called our Partners for the Future Foundation. So I am the nominal head of that. I have staff that is dedicated to that. And we raise money to send Korean students from disadvantaged backgrounds to Korean universities. We've raised millions of dollars since this program was incepted in the year 2000. We've sent thousands of Korean students to university, and it's something we're very proud of. I will say that U.S. companies have evolved to the point where most of our biggest companies have CSR designated executives. Their entire job is to make sure their companies do appropriate CSR around the world. But as this CSR DNA has evolved in U.S. companies, we've also realized that really the importance is giving back to society. It's not bragging about it. And, the unfortunate result of not bragging about it is we get a lot of feedback from Koreans saying you don't give enough back to Korean society. So we're in a little bit of a dilemma here. That's one thing I'll say. Another thing I will say is there seems to be a new concept growing in Korea that making a profit is a bad thing. It is not a bad thing. Even in the cases where foreign investors came into Korea after the economic downturn, I think it is very underreported and underappreciated the fact that many of these investors saved thousands and thousands of Korean workers from being unemployed. If they had not invested when they did, these companies would have crumbled, and there would have been a lot more economic difficulties for individual Korean families. So is it a bad thing that investors came in, injected money into failing companies, made them healthy again, and then took a profit and left? Is that really a bad thing? I think that's up for debate. I'll stop there. Sorry, I'm going on.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think this, your point is very much relevant, and I'm so delighted that I was able to organize this forum with the on the request of the Dr. Kim Yun-hyung, because I would like to really emphasize that the foreign companies in Korea somehow needs to be concerned with the community and society, and also, in terms of the sort of corporate social responsibility. Not to bragging, okay, what you are doing, but you are also part of the Korean community to enhance synergistic, partnership, even extending the creating shared value concept. Okay, so I really appreciate your point. All right, this one seems to me a rather technical point, and addressed to Ueno-san. Labor productivity. Okay, you mentioned that, and the question is this. To solve this problem, Korean Ministry of Education adopted the P-TECH, Pathway in Technology, which is praised by President even Obama. How do you think about the pathway in technology?
So I'm not so familiar with pathway.
Pathway technology. And here, apparently, Obama, did tossed out this idea, pathway technology. Maybe I thought who raised this question? Maybe, this is sort of the early adopter or pathfinder approach to bring in a new technology, new ideas. That is my intuitive interpretation. All right. With that, and I think time is running up. I'll give you each panelist just to say, 1 minute, whatever you wanted to emphasize or whatever you left out, although you intended to speak out. Okay. Let me go ahead in reverse order. Andrea?
Well, a lot of things have been said, and if we had to say in just one nutshell, I'd just recommend a bit of patience, because what we discussed today is never going to come by regulation alone and by goodwill alone. It'll come by time. And I think, Luca, you expressed this from the French example. It's clearly going to come, but it's not going to come tomorrow. It'll take more than that.
Okay, and, Mr. Pude?
So I will build on that. I think it's a matter of frame of mind. And to change frames of mind, it takes time through education. So policy can be the trigger, but now we need to wait and see that policy prove itself. And not 1 year, 2 years. I would say it's actually on a 10-year scale that you need to measure that efficiency.
Okay. Ueno-san?
Yes, thank you very much for giving us opportunity today. But I really love to talk with the young generation like students, and this is great opportunity for personally for me to drive in the creative economy in the near future. I think both young generation like private sector need to open up some of our conversation and communication somehow. It's really important way to drive. I think this economy, I believe, driven by people. It's technology also kind of part of the element, but most important is the people. So that's why I love to support young generation and for the future Korean economy.
Okay, Amy. Grand wrap up.
I think one thing that's very important for creative economy, and it relates to, I think, the first two questions that were asked, is I think Korea's definition of success in the economy is too narrow. Mm-hmm. So Microsoft and Apple are some of America's most innovative companies. The personal histories of the founders are well known. I mean, how many of the students here, how many of you, if you decided to drop out of college to pursue your innovative idea, how many of your parents would support you in that? Raise your hand. Yeah. I think we need to broaden the definition of success in Korea, not just go to university and work for a table. there are many other ways for success, and parents need to embrace that as well as students. The government needs to embrace it, and give more latitude to people with creative ideas to bring them to fruition, not in just one straight narrow path.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's just impossible for me, to wrap up the whole thing within just a few minutes, but nevertheless, let me point out some essential key points the way I, understood. First, I think our panelists recommend that the Korean government must come up with more detailed roadmap on the creative economy, the contents of the creative economy, and the policy actions to promote creative economy must be known at international market and potential investors, even including the 17 different locations. What they are going to do, this must be dispersed throughout the world. And second, I think the major point, I want to mention is that this labor market flexibility and how we can increase, labor market productivity. And then the creative economy, needs a creative, the education program, and the deviating from Korea's traditional way of societal, ordering in terms of seniority basis. And also the small medium enterprise needs to be looked at, needs to be designed for a long-term sustainable framework, not the short-term, the beneficial, the impact, market-based. And perhaps the last point is a partnership between multinational companies and the local SME or local communities, also very important. In fact, many multinational companies are carrying along that. And, the last point, Amy mentioned that what is definition of success? I mean, is any Korean college student here who can challenge to pursue a new career, even dropping out of the college, as we saw in the Bill Gates and, other great, the entrepreneurs and great innovators. Well, of course, I do have a whole bunch of this, recommended, especially the policy transparency. Okay. I think these things will be summarized and will be delivered to higher authority in the Korean government on the name of the Korea Forum for Progress. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude the session, and please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists. The meeting is adjourned.